There are moments in life when silence feels safer than speaking. Yet Padre Pio warned that there is a silence which wounds the soul. He once witnessed the spiritual consequence of remaining quiet when justice was threatened. The memory of it stayed with him for years, and he spoke of it with a trembling seriousness, as if the weight of that moment still pressed upon his heart. He understood that God sees not only what we say, but what we choose to withhold at the very hour someone needs truth the most. When your heart feels the fear of speaking for what is right, leave a small prayer in the comment section. Lord, give me courage when I feel silent inside. This simple act opens the heart to receive gentle grace and invites God to strengthen what feels weak within you. Padre Pio hinted that the soul pays a quiet price when it abandons the good it was called to defend. And that price is far deeper than we imagine. There is a moment in every soul's journey when remaining silent feels easier than risking discomfort. Yet Padre Pio understood that silence during injustice does not stay confined to a single moment. It echoes inward, settling into the conscience and shaping the heart in ways that are often unseen. He taught that the soul is formed by its choices and even more by its refusals, especially the refusal to defend what is true when someone is being harmed or when goodness is being threatened. This is why the stakes are so grave. A silence born from fear slowly becomes a habit, and a habit becomes a disposition, and a disposition becomes a spiritual blindness that quietly distances a person from the clarity of God's voice. Padre Pio saw how the human heart can wither when it turns away from the responsibility to protect what is right in God's eyes. He never spoke of punishment, but he did speak of consequences woven into the fabric of the soul itself. To remain silent when truth begs for our voice is to allow a part of ourselves to grow dim until courage feels impossible and the heart forgets how to rise. Padre Pio once shared a quiet reflection about a man who faced a moment of injustice and chose to remain silent. He did not reveal the man's name nor the details of the event, but he spoke of the man's interior struggle with a gravity that suggested he had seen something unfold beyond the surface. He described a sorrow that settled upon the man, not imposed by God, but awakened within the man's own conscience, as if truth itself had retreated from him because he refused to defend it. What startled many who heard Padre Pio was not the man's silence, but what followed. The man began to lose the ability to discern the gentle movements of grace, not through punishment, but through the dulling of a sensitivity that once made him attentive to God's presence. Padre Pio explained that when a person denies justice, the heart becomes hesitant, and that hesitation builds walls between the soul and the inspirations that once guided it. Then came the spiritual twist that Padre Pio never dramatized yet spoke with unmistakable seriousness. He said that the man later tried to act with courage in a different situation but found himself unable to speak, as if the voice that once could have defended the good had quietly weakened over time. For Padre Pio, this was the true cost of remaining silent when truth was threatened. It was not the event itself, but the transformation that followed a soft erosion of the inner strength the soul needs to stand before God with integrity. He urged his listeners never to underestimate the hidden battle that begins the moment we choose comfort over courage. Padre Pio often spoke slowly, as if his words were shaped by long hours of prayer, and in these moments of teaching his voice carried a weight that invited deep reflection. When he described the consequence of silent surrender, he was not condemning but guiding, as a physician guides a patient toward understanding the wound that must be healed. He explained that every soul faces moments when speaking the truth feels dangerous, or when defending someone feels costly, or when acknowledging wrongdoing could disturb the fragile peace of a room, a family, a friendship, or even the heart itself. In such moments, silence becomes tempting because it hides us from discomfort. But Padre Pio taught that the soul was not created for comfort without righteousness. It was created to reflect the truth of God, even when that truth trembles upon the lips. To stay silent when goodness is threatened is to let that reflection dim. And when the reflection dims, the soul begins to lose its sense of direction, as if walking through a soft dusk where shapes are still visible yet far less clear. He often reminded the faithful that God gives grace for courage only when the heart opens itself to receive it. A closed heart, a hesitant heart, a fearful heart limits the very grace that could strengthen it. Padre Pio had seen this happen in those who came to him for confession, seeking clarity, yet discovering that their unwillingness to defend the good had slowly clouded their discernment. He would say gently that truth is like light, and if a person rejects the chance to shine it even once by remaining silent during injustice, the light within becomes easier to ignore the next time. He described how one small silence can seed a greater silence, and that greater silence can develop into an inner numbness where the voice of God feels distant not because God withdraws, but because the soul grows unfamiliar with the sound of truth. Padre Pio understood that the conscience is like a delicate instrument tuned by grace, and even a single act of silence in the face of wrongdoing can loosen the strings, dulling the music it was meant to play. He saw this in the confessional when people admitted they had watched someone suffer, or watched truth be distorted, or watched goodness be mocked and said nothing. He never responded with harshness, but with a sorrow, as though he were looking at a soul that had stepped away from its own dignity. For Padre Pio to defend the good was not an act of heroism, but an act of communion, a joining of the soul with the justice of God. He often paused, allowing silence to stretch in the room so the heart could feel the depth of his teaching. And then he would remind them that the spiritual journey is shaped not only by the great sacrifices, but by the small hidden choices to speak gently, to defend truth patiently, and to resist the temptation to hide behind silence when someone needs protection. He taught that defending truth does not always require loudness, nor confrontation, nor force. Sometimes it is a single calm sentence spoken for the sake of righteousness. Sometimes it is standing beside someone so they are not alone. Sometimes it is simply not agreeing with a lie, even if refusing feels frightening. For Padre Pio, the journey toward spiritual maturity was a journey toward holy courage. A courage that grows not from pride, but from love, and from an understanding that the soul must choose its allegiance in small ways long before the world notices. Padre Pio once recounted a moment that revealed the deep spiritual gravity of remaining silent when justice trembled in the balance. He spoke of a man who witnessed another being wronged, and though his heart stirred, and though grace whispered to him, and though he knew the truth clearly, he allowed fear to close his throat. The man walked away, hoping the moment would disappear behind him, as most uncomfortable memories do. But Padre Pio explained that the soul does not walk away so easily. That evening the man entered the chapel, seeking peace. Yet he felt a strange heaviness settling over him like a dim veil. He tried to pray, but the words felt thin, as if the heart could not rise. He tried to examine his conscience, yet everything inside seemed muffled, as though a soft fog had settled between him and the light of God. Padre Pio described this not as punishment, but as a spiritual reality, a natural effect, like a lamp beginning to dim because something has obstructed the flame. He said the man sensed that he had stepped away from who he was meant to be. A small betrayal of truth had brushed against the deepest part of his identity, the part that longs to mirror God's justice. The soul knows when it has refused its mission, even in the smallest moment, and that knowledge wounded the man in a quiet, hidden, aching way. The next day the man returned to Padre Pio, seeking clarity. He confessed the silence he had chosen, the fear that had bound his voice, the moment he had let pass, while injustice was suffered in front of him. Padre Pio listened, not with harshness, but with a sorrow that seemed to enter the man's heart and illuminate what he had not understood. He told him gently that God had given him the grace of courage in that exact moment, but grace cannot act when the soul closes its doors in fear. The man asked if this silence had changed his relationship with God. Padre Pio answered softly that the relationship was not broken, but it had been bruised, the way a tender limb is bruised when someone pulls away from a helping hand. He explained that every time we refuse to speak truth, a subtle fracture forms between who we are and who God calls us to become. Not a rupture, but a fracture, a small, unseen separation that weakens spiritual strength and makes future courage more difficult to embrace. Then Padre Pio shared what had moved him most deeply. When the man attempted an act of charity later that day, his heart felt strangely hesitant, as though the courage he once carried had thinned. Padre Pio saw that this was the lasting consequence of the earlier silence. The soul had stepped away from the path of justice, and in doing so, its ability to act with freedom had been quietly diminished, not by God, but by the man's own withdrawal from grace. Padre Pio looked at him with great tenderness and said something that remained carved into the memories of those who heard it. "When you refuse to defend the truth, you teach your soul to fear the light." He explained that the greatest danger was not the moment of silence, but the transformation that followed the gradual shaping of the heart, toward timidity, toward hesitation, toward the slow dulling of spiritual clarity that God had once offered. For Padre Pio, this was the unseen battlefield, where the soul either aligns itself with truth or retreats into the quiet shadows where fear becomes familiar. He emphasized that the man's wound could heal, but healing required sincere repentance, a turning back toward the light, and a renewed willingness to stand with courage in the next moment of testing. Padre Pio insisted that God always provides another opportunity for the soul to choose truth, and that each act of courage restores what fear had taken. The climax of his teaching rested in this revelation, that heaven measures our fidelity not by success, not by eloquence, but by whether we allow grace to speak through us when justice is placed before our eyes. Silence may feel safe, but it shapes the soul, and the soul was not created to hide from the light. Padre Pio often concluded teachings like this with a gentleness that eased the burden from every listening heart. He did not want souls to remain afraid, nor trapped in the memory of their own failings. Instead, he invited them to step back into the light with the quiet trust that God restores what fear has wounded. He spoke of grace as a soft but steady companion, always ready to strengthen the courage that once faltered. He reminded the faithful that God does not abandon those who wish to begin again. A single sincere act of truth spoken with humility can heal places within the heart that silence once damaged. He encouraged people to ask God for the grace to recognize moments of testing and to respond not with perfect words, but with honest fidelity. For Padre Pio, even the smallest act of courage was a victory that echoed in eternity. He urged souls to forgive themselves, to rise to trust that God is patient and that the journey toward holy courage is shaped one moment at a time. He taught that when we choose the light after having once hidden from it, the heart becomes stronger, the conscience grows clearer, and the voice of God returns with new tenderness. In this quiet, he offered his final encouragement, that every soul is capable of great courage when it leans upon grace and opens itself to the gentle strength that comes from God alone. If you seek deeper peace and guidance, you are welcome to subscribe and join this prayerful community.